Future Warrior, the Mars Campaign. Chapter 11. The advancing Red Legion formations were caught by enfilading fire, and their flank began to collapse amid the brutal assault from the onrushing 5th Armored. The Red Divisional commander tried to swing his units towards the new threat, but it was too late, and the formations, or what was left of them, began to come apart, chaos ensuing in the Red ranks. As he lay there in his foxhole watching, Stalker ceased being an active participant and instead became a spectator as an apocalyptic clash of machines unfolded before him. The tanks of the 5th Armored Division spread out along a wide front as they attacked, and the fire they put out was truly terrible to behold. Entire Red Legion formations were gutted, and all command and control broke down as the 5th tore across the field. Equally amazingly was that the tide of Red vehicles didn't slow, and over the distant hills a continuous wall of armored might continued to pour onto the plain. Slowly the 5th Armored was forced to halt its advance and try to hold its positions as it began to take a steady stream of return fire, columns of smoke rising skywards on both sides. The crack of L-66 cannons and the fizz-hiss flash of plasma fire had risen into a furious crescendo that drowned out everything and was punctuated only by the occasional blur of a passing missile on its way to deliver destruction. An infantryman tapped Stalker on the shoulder and pointed skyward. Stalker looked up and saw in the sky behind him a glorious sight. Like manna from heaven, the sky was filled with orbital assault pods, thousands of them. The pod began to land behind the lines and in the FOBs. Emerging from them, Stalker saw armored figures. Some were gold and silver, while others were colored a deep blue. The wave of armored soldiers charged out and headed towards the front lines. 2 more of the 10 had arrived. The Viking and Crusader assault divisions had made planetfall. The ground shook and the sky was filled with fighter and fighter bombers from both sides. The patterns of their wakes formed trails in the sky reminiscent of ancient aerial battles of Earth's past, as some hunted and some tried to avoid the hunters. Gold and silver armored troops of the Vikings arrived at Stalker's position, and amongst all the death and noise they shook hands and congratulated the Terra Nova, Excalibur, and Praetorian soldiers on a brilliant defense. As Stalker shook hands with one of the shining warriors, he noted his features. He wore the same EEA suit as Stalker, but it had a carved silver breastplate featuring 2 crossed golden hammers. Beneath them was the Vikings' divisional motto, written in Nordic runes, which translated said, "Warriors of Thunder." They were soon joined by a squad of dark blue armored crusaders who had deployed alongside the Viking men, their unit commander also extending his congratulations. Stalker thought for a moment to recall the crusaders' motto, "In his name we fight." Looking at the blue armored man before him, shaking his hand, Stalker had no doubt that they came to deliver on that promise. "We have to hold them here as long as we can. The 2nd Armored is at this moment hitting the other flank of the Reds' advance at Centurion, and we have thrown every available aircraft into the fight." "That's not going to be enough," Jovinus said to the Crusader commander, who turned to him as an artillery round landed close by and showered them all with earth. "I know. Stratcom thinks the Reds have committed the bulk of their mobile forces to this counterattack and has authorized the deployment of the 1st Mecha Corps. It's moving up now." "Hot damn, we just might survive this after all," said Jovinus. And after a few more words, the small group split up and rejoined their respective units. As he got back to his position, Stalker mulled over the news brought by the Crusader. The 1st Mecha Corps was being committed to the fight. After the last Corporation War, UDF Command had decided it needed to concentrate its heavy mecha in a specialist mecha unit as opposed to using them piecemeal as in previous conflicts. Some independent mecha battalions, such as the Blue Sabres, were still retained for set-piece assaults, surprise attacks, and to plug gaps, but most have been rolled into one corps, which was commanded by veteran mecha officers. This meant that a METCOM officer, rather than by the senior on-scene UDF commander, had tactical control of the mecha forces. This was implemented because it had been found in previous conflicts that commanders from other branches often used mecha units inappropriately due to not being experienced with what they could do and where they were best employed. The change also meant that the 1st Mecha Corps had its own independent command, METCOM, and was answerable only to Stratcom and not the normal TACCOM UEDF chain of command. A change that had caused a few ruffled feathers inside TACCOM, but had been welcomed by the mecha crews. The exact strength of the 1st Mecha Corps also remained a closely guarded secret, and was rumored to be as many as several thousand machines deployed on bases throughout occupied space, including an unknown number of Goliaths and specially modified recon striders. Collectively, it was the heaviest single ground unit in the entire UEDF order of battle, able to deliver the most firepower and mobility in the possible shortest time. The situation on the plane remained precarious as the 5th Armored continued to take and inflict losses, the battle quickly reaching a critical stage. In a fluid and impressive maneuver, the whole division, 1 battalion at a time, redeployed while under fire and withdrew, integrating themselves into the existing infantry lines, now further reinforced by the arrival of the Vikings and Crusaders. An assassin tank reversed close to Stalker's position, and as its plasma cannon charged and fired, Stalker swore he could feel his hair on his arms, even through the EEA suit, stand on end. A tank cannon round hit the assassin with a loud clung, but was deflected by its advanced sloped composite armor and ricocheted into the ground behind Stalker with an earthy thud. Stalker stuck his head up for a better view of the battlefield as the plasma guns went off again with a fizz hiss, and saw a red Warthog APC in the distance get cut in half by the twin burst. Stalker also saw that the red forces all over the field were withdrawing, a number of multispectral smoke artillery rounds landing to cover their retreat. In a surprisingly short period of time, the battlefield was gripped by a relative calm, which was only broken by the occasional crack of a tank's cannon or the thud of an artillery shell from further along the line. Whatever the reprieve, Stalker was certain of one thing: it couldn't last for long. The Reds had to keep pushing forward, and fast, before the UEDF could bring any more of its formations to bear. 5 kilometers beyond the distant hills, the Red Legion Corps commander was furious. He was convinced his leading divisions had walked into a well-prepared ambush, and despite his faith in the cause, it angered him to be outsmarted and to lose so many irreplaceable men and machines. He had been promised only weak infantry resistance. Where the hell had the tanks come from? The UEDF had always shown itself to be ponderous, and its command structure too rigid to react to quickly changing situations, and yet they seemed to have reinforced the position near FOB Warlock with as many as 5 divisions if the frontline reports were to be believed. 5 divisions, he growled through gritted teeth. It would take hours to prepare the rest of his already damaged corps to attack and push back a force that size. He would also have to bring his heavy artillery forward to soften up the UEDF positions, as it seemed his friends in the Martian Air Corps had lost control of the skies as well. He took a deep breath and looked at the mass of men and machines around him. Yes, it was worth it for the cause and for his people's freedom. For Mars and for his faith, he would defeat the impure blasphemers before him. They were not worthy of the future path, and he would be rewarded for his faith and his efforts. If not in this life, then he could wait for the next. There had been nearly an hour of relative peace when the first artillery shell screamed in, a rolling barrage that slowly built up in intensity until it reached a fever pitch, heavy shells raining down on the lines and churning up the red earth, shattering both men and machines. The Red Legion commander was coming. He wanted the bases, and this time nothing was going to stop him. Amid the tempest, Stalker, D. Jovinus, and a Crusader unit commander stayed alert and scanned the front. Soon smoke shells began to fall, and they all knew that was the signal the enemy was moving. In a calm voice, D activated the comm net. All units prepare for ground assault. The assassin next to Stalker had survived the shelling, although it seemed half buried as it was nearly covered in debris and dirt. Its turret slowly traversed back and forth, seeking the enemy, its crew willing the visual tracking systems to see through the smoke. Before Stalker or any of the other infantry could see anything, the stronger visual amplification systems on the MBTs allowed them to identify the approaching enemy, and they opened fire. Through the haze of smoke, the flashes of plasma and cannon fire could be seen and were soon joined by lines of tracers sweeping back and forth through the haze. Stalker heard small arms fire erupt to his left and then red figures emerged from the smoke screen in front of him. Rising to his knees, Stalker snapped off a burst, seeing one of the running figures spin and fall. Dozens of muzzle flashes lit up in response, and the ground around Stalker was kicked up with impacts. The enemy soldiers moved in rushes from shell hole to shell hole, while constantly putting down covering fire. Stalker quickly recognized that these were not the same green troops he had faced at Tharsis. Their fire was accurate, and he felt several rounds impact his armor, but his integrity indicator on his HUD still showed all sections as green, indicating that none had penetrated his ceramic composite-plated suit. All around, the shadowy shapes of vehicles moved, grenades went off, and there was the bark of IW-30 fire and the return bark of ASBR fire. A grenade landed close, and Stalker backhanded it away and rolled out of his foxhole, using his M503 to launch a frag grenade back in the direction it had come from. The enemy grenade went off, the concussion knocking Stalker flat. The remote weapon station on the assassin was now in full swing, the barrels of the two 15mm machine guns beginning to glow red. Stalker saw D from his nearby foxhole snap right and fire. Following the direction of his fire, Stalker saw that an enemy squad had closed close. The Reds targeted the assassin tank using a shell hole as cover, and hit it in the track with a slap anti-tank rocket, turning it into a 90-ton pillbox. Suddenly the comm net crackled with calls. God wills it, thunder upon the earth. And even over the noise of battle, Stalker heard a great hurrah coming from hundreds of voices. Looking for the source while still firing to keep the Reds pinned down, Stalker saw the blue, gold, and silver men of the Crusaders and Vikings were up and charging into the thick smoke. Oh, here we go. More defiant calls came through over the comm net as the remaining Praetorians and Excalibur men joined the attack. Stalker saw Javinus charge, surrounded by a group of other deep purple armored men, the group yelling, "All enemies of Earth die." An Excalibur unit next to him followed Javinus's example, being led by their commander, the men rallying to the shout of, "For the lady." Next to him, D jumped to his feet and with a bellow of "Death to all," charged. Stalker and the other remaining Terra Nova following hot on his heels into the dense wall of smoke. Stalker's ears were filled with the sounds of his own breathing and the rapid beating of his heart as he ran into the wall of soup like smoke, his armor and weapons feeling like dead weight, threatening to drag him down. As Stalker ran, he moved as he had been trained to do, rifle up to his shoulder and scanning left to right looking for targets. Everywhere the noise of small arms fire reared up and the crumps of grenades echoed through the smoky, cratered landscape. After blasting their way through the remnants of the Red Squad, they came upon a full platoon of Red Legion soldiers who were in the mid-process of setting up some type of jamming device, and cut them down without even stopping to catch breath. The Red Legion soldiers had never had a chance, and Stalker didn't give them a second glance as he stepped over their broken bodies and hurried to keep pace with the others. Firing erupted in front of him, and muzzle flashes sparkled up ahead through the smoke. Stalker felt a round impact on his armor, but he didn't even break his stride. He saw the others ahead had halted and were kneeling, their impulse rifles blazing back and forth with ruthless precision. Stalker paused alongside them and saw hundreds of Reds coming at them through the smoke. They appeared disorganized, and it was clear they hadn't been expecting a counterattack and had probably been forming up when the assault troops had blundered into them. Stalker added his M503's 50mm grenades to the veritable storm of fire as the Reds were mowed down, their greater numbers counting for nothing against the sheer volume of lethal fire being put out by the elite assault troops. A Red officer tried to rally his men. He called to them and charged. Stalker delayed a moment before shooting him. The man carried a long ceramic presentation sword, something Stalker hadn't seen outside of a parade ground. Then with clinical precision, Stalker squeezed off a round, and the officer fell in the dust, his sword falling to the ground next to its owner. When the firing died down, scores of Red bodies littered the ground, a few wearing EEA joining them, the Reds paying for every death with steep interest. Armored vehicles moved through the smoke, and Stalker dived to the ground as a stream of heavy tracers passed only feet from his head. Looking for the culprit, he spied a red Ironhide IFV a moment before a blue armor crusader soldier hit it with a slap launcher, the IFV slewing to one side as it ground to a halt, smoke billowing from a hole in its flank. Stalker noticed he was next to the officer he had shot, and on impulse reached out and clipped the sword on his side. Could come in handy. More vehicles came nosing through the smoke in staggered formation, turrets seeking the enemy. The smoke was thinning, and Stalker saw D and the others slightly ahead of him rush the oncoming vehicles in a seemingly suicidal move, fire lancing out towards the running lines of armored men. Some were cut down, but most continued advancing in rushes from shell hole to shell hole, all the time peppering the tanks, APCs, and IFVs with impulse fire. The powerful impulse rounds shattering optics, destroying remote weapon stations, penetrating armor, and killing and maiming passengers and crew. The assault troops were in their element. Cohesion in the red armored unit broke down, with half the red vehicles continuing to advance and half deciding to retreat in the face of this new threat, and with their infantry support all but gone. Stalker saw the signs of panic as several vehicles reversed into others behind them in the confusion. The line of assault troops closed the range, and, as if by some unknown command, began to unleash salvos of 50mm heat grenades. Others further back launched slap anti-tank rockets. The enemy infantry carriers tried to unload their human cargo, but it was pure slaughter. Stalker saw one Ironhide, after lowering its rear ramp, begin to reverse in panic and crush several of its own men as they tried to scramble out. The tanks amongst the Red Legion formation held their ground, and the assault troops closed to point-blank range and even climbed onto them. Stalker saw one Viking soldier shoot up a Devastator's remote weapon station and climb on top of it before jamming some type of device, probably a shaped C6 charge, under the rear of the turret. As he rose to jump off the massive tank, he was literally cut in half by a burst from another red vehicle, and blood and gore splashed over the turret, looking black against the crude red paint. A moment later, the tank's turret was lifted skywards as the tank exploded in spectacular secondaries, no one seeming to notice as the battle raged all around. Like ants overwhelming a herd of elephants, the line of red armor was slowly but surely overwhelmed, simply unable to react to and pin down the numerous assault troops as they charged from the smoke at close range. Without infantry support, the red formations were cut to pieces, although at a staggering cost to the attackers. Everywhere he looked, Stalker saw the fallen and crushed bodies of his brother assault troops. Most were gold/silver and blue, but there were also the bodies of deep purple Praetorians, black Terra Nova, and white and red Excaliburs, soldiers of the original 10 fighting and falling together. The comm net crackled with static as Stalker moved up to D's position by a smoking Wasp anti-tank vehicle. He was talking on his TAC net. "Yes, I concur, we can't stay here. By now they will be zeroing us. Yes, Commander, moving now. Alpha Epsilon out." Stalker slid in alongside D and looked down his rifle through the smoke. Neither spoke. There was no need. As D signaled to other commanders on the commnet, Stalker did an ammo check. He had only a handful of magazines left for his impulse rifle, 3 50mm frag grenades left for his M503, and one standard frag grenade on a chest clip. Not much an arsenal, he thought. Stalker suddenly realized he was being talked to and snapped out of his thoughts as D called to him again. "Hey, Stalker, you hear the command? The man wants us out of here. Let's go." As Stalker looked around, he saw everyone was starting to pull back to the UEDF lines, artillery already starting to fall. D was talking on the comm net. As he moved, all Terra Nova pulled back to the first phase line. Stalker followed, watching D and others pause to check and identify soldiers by scanning the identity barcodes on the fallen bodies as they moved. The last of the smoke was blowing from the battlefield and beginning to reveal the true scale of the destruction, as all around hundreds of destroyed red vehicles became visible all along the front, intermixed with seemingly countless fallen soldiers for both sides. All along the line, there was near silence as the battered assault troops returned to their hastily dug foxholes, scrapes, and prepared positions. The regular infantry soldiers who had witnessed the assault were quiet with awe at these men who seemed to know no fear in the face of seemingly suicidal odds. Stalker knew that the newly arrived assault divisions had already paid a high price, but without them the line would never have held, and he knew that the price was worth paying. In the Red Legion Commander's CP, the Corps commander was apocalyptic with rage. He had been pushed against his wishes by his higher command to attack before he was ready, and it had failed. This wasn't the way it was supposed to happen. They were supposed to seize the bases before the inevitable UEDF counterattack came. The plan's timetable was out the window now, and they would have to fight the planned battle without the additional supplies and on the wrong terrain. He stopped and took a deep breath. He still commanded units of exceptional power, but he knew if he continued to commit them piecemeal as he had been forced to do, they would be chewed up against the stubborn defense being offered by the UDF infantry. He would have to wait for the mecha forces, and, as much as he hated to admit it, the initiative had been lost. He knew his men would likely die in the fight that was coming. That was now unavoidable, but their lives were supposed to buy time for the work at Hellas. They had to hold out and delay the UEDF long enough for the works to be completed. Everything depended on it. Stalker slid into a shallow hole next to a wide-eyed infantry soldier. The man seemed as worried about him as the Reds. "Sir, are you injured?" Stalker glanced at his suit's integrity display. In his HUD, all sections were green, and despite being as weary as he ever had been, he felt fine. The man sensed Stalker's confusion and pointed at him. "Is that your blood, sir? I have a medical aid pack if you need it." Stalker looked at his chest, as saw it was caked with blood and dirt, and looking at it, he realized his whole suit was filthy. It dawned on Stalker what a sight he must have been. "There isn't a Redborn who can kill me, Private. You keep that kit. Someone is bound to need it before long." As Stalker lay in the hole, listening to the battlefield, he heard only occasional scattered bursts or single shots breaking the silence, the artillery fire having died off. As the wind picked up, most of the smoke cleared, save the wafting black, acrid smoke from the hundreds of burning vehicles of both sides. Dee kneeled down next to the scrape, a word specialist. Stalker took one last look forward. "Keep your eyes open, soldier," and with a nod to the infantryman, he dragged himself achingly to his feet and followed Dee to the rear. They stopped behind a massive bulk of a 5th Armored Assassin tank, its twin blue flags fluttering in the Martian wind above the turret, looking somehow out of place amid the red dirt that coated everything. Stalker saw a grouping of unit leaders and officers huddled over a hastily erected table made from ammunition crates. Representatives from the assault divisions were there along with a tank commander and some very weary-looking infantry officers, about 24 in total. "Nice of you to join us, gentlemen," said Jovinus, his expression behind his purple helmet's tinted visor unreadable, although Stalker thought he detected mirth behind the comment. "I found him lying down on the job, next to a cute little infantryman," boomed D. The comment brought a chorus of laughter all around, although a couple of the infantry officers balked. They quickly settled into business. It appeared that the Reds had withdrawn from the immediate battle all along the front to consolidate their position before remounting fresh attacks. Elements of the 5th and 2nd Armored had reported probing on the flanks. Slightly better news was that precarious control of the air over the battle lines had been gained. There were now a confirmed 3 full enemy corps, as well as what remained of the 1st Corps they had been engaging, heading their way, and the day remained far from one. It was now afternoon, 1,506 hours by Stalker's HUD. Has it only been that long? It felt like days since the battle on the ridge, not hours. Incoming. There was a whistle followed by a nearby thud. "Doesn't seem like they've gone that far," murmured the tank officer as artillery began to thud in a slow but constant stream all along the line. There was a sudden flash, an echoing boom, and the group flinched. Stalker looked over his shoulder and saw a battery of 6 Zeus self-propelled artillery pieces nearby. From one of the 203mm barrels, a thin wisp of smoke was emerging. On top of all 6 vehicles, little radars spun seemingly in perfect unison, and as Stalker watched the 6 massive turrets begin to lowly traverse to the right. Stalker remembered that the Zeus SBAs, a relatively new piece of kit in UEDF service, used mini, unmanned aerial vehicles. UAVs, to direct their lethal fire. These were fired in a special shell towards the approximate location of the enemy. While still in flight, the UAVs emerged from the shell casing and unfolded to take up powered flight. Once the UAV, only a few feet across, took up position, the commander of the battery, using a radar link, could see live images and correct the fire of his battery in real time to lethal effect. Even as Stalker watched inside the armored hide of one of the Zeus SBAs, the vehicle commander selected a directed armor-piercing DAP round to be followed by a high-explosive fragmentation HEF round. Over 20 kilometers away, circling high in the sky, a small UAV covered in a radar-absorbing coating was looking at a battery of Red Legion Centaur SBAs surrounded by light armored vehicles and scurrying men with its single swiveling eye. One by one, it looked at the 6 Centaurs, then forwarded the GPS, wind, temperature, and distance data back to the Zeuses, whose advanced targeting computers plotted a solution and adjusted the guns. With roar, all 6 fired simultaneously, shaking the ground and raising a cloud of dust, followed 4 seconds later by a second salvo. As the UAV impassively observed, the first rounds of DAP arrived at the enemy battery. The enemy battery commander was out of his vehicle, standing by a command and control Warthog when he heard the incoming shells. As he turned to bellow an order, he saw all 6 of his guns explode and was knocked to the ground by the shockwave. As he and the other day's survivors staggered up and looked at the devastation that moments before had been a fighting unit, the HEF round arrived. At 25 meters from the ground, they detonated, showering the entire area with superheated metallic fragments that pierced armor and flesh alike, men and machines shattering in a holocaust of destruction. Above the scene of utter carnage, the mini UAV continued its silent vigil, its cold, dark plexiglass eye watching and waiting to see who would turn up in response to the strike. Oblivious to the distant destruction, Stalker watched the senior commanders on site debate tactics and options. While communications techs tried to establish communications with TACCOM, some wanted to withdraw to a more defensible position, a move bitterly opposed by the assault units. "You want us to abandon this ground littered with our fallen brothers, and held at such a high price? Not to mention abandoning the FOBs that the Reds want so badly. What good does it do if we're destroyed in place? We barely held 1 core. We cannot stop 3 full core. Our flanks are exposed, and the first mecha core is only just starting to deploy from orbit. It will take days to deploy in full strength. You withdraw if you want, but the Praetorians stay, as will the Terra Nova," said D in a low growl, the Excalibur, Crusader, and Viking leaders concurring. The armored officer who had been watching impassively chipped in. "With all the destroyed armor on the field to our front, it will inhibit any further frontal attacks by massed formations. They will flank us with core strength, and we will be enveloped. We also don't know where their mecha are, and those are very bad news for my tanks." Stalker saw several officers nod knowingly, having seen what the Red mecha had done on the ridge earlier. The Reds will need a few hours at most to deploy for another attack. There is little time, gentlemen. The others looked at D, and everyone suddenly looked more tired. Stalker broke the silence. "What news of reinforcements?" An infantry officer, looking remarkably clean and starched, spoke in a tired voice. "The first mecha is being deployed now, but has to come through Elysium before being shipped here, and Stratcom won't risk committing it piecemeal. The bulk of the 11th and 16th Mechanized Divisions are being airlifted to the flanks to reinforce the 2nd and 5th Armored. 2 infantry divisions, the 81st and 53rd, should begin arriving any moment to reinforce the front line, though they will be without most of their heavy equipment, as our air transport has taken a fearful beating from Red fighters." He wiped some sweat from his brow, then resumed, his voice sounding slightly metallic through his respirator. "Other than that, the fleet transport network is stretched to the limit. We have been well and truly blindsided by the Reds' offensive, but from what I can gather, TACCOM is moving heaven and earth to get units into the fight." There was a crackle of comms, and D and the other unit commanders paused, listening, and Excalibur speaking first. "Well, it seems that more of the 10 have made planetfall, and with that all eyes turned skyward. Once again, orbital assault pods filled the sky. These pods were colored a deep shade of green and were emblazoned with a Latin slogan written in brilliant bronze. Stalker, even without his helmet's advanced vision, knew what it said. The end justifies the means. The motto and color were unmistakable. The Philistines had arrived on Mars. The pods landed amongst the others from the previous landing, and out of them poured green armored troops bristling with grenades and missile launchers. Even from a distant, Stalker could see that they were spoiling for a fight. Most of them moved towards the frontal positions, while a small group moved to where Stalker was standing, their polished green armored suits glinting in the sunlight. They cradled their weapons with the casual attitude of true professionals and strode confidently, almost arrogantly, up to the onlooking meeting. Getting hard to find a park around here. This must be a fashionable fight. It certainly seems to have attracted the best people. They exchanged greetings with the Philistine, a tall, cocky battle commander who went by the name of Shur. They all liked him immediately. With the Philistine's arrival, all talk of retreat was ended, and shortly after LTTs and HTTs began to arrive, carrying the leading elements of the reinforcing infantry divisions. As they touched down, squads of camouflage soldiers poured out, and led by waving NCOs, took up positions and began organizing cover and digging trenches. The HDDs also brought some light armored and anti-tank vehicles, which were dispersed along the front. Stalker also noticed a few larger green drop pods landing in the chaos, and immediately recognized what they were. Stalker tapped D on the shoulder and pointed them out. As they looked on, one of the large pods landed close by, and as soon as it touched down, its sides collapsed outwards with a clang. The Strider inside stood to full height before it boosted over their heads and landed gracefully forward of the lines. Then, with a burst of ion thrusters, it went skimming around burnout vehicles and headed out to recon the enemy positions. Stalker did a rough calculation in his head of the strength they could now field. With the survivors of the original base personnel, the divisions who fought on the ridge, and the remaining Terra Nova, Praetorian, Viking, Crusader, and Excalibur assault troops, they had at best 30,000 troops dispersed along the front. Most of those coming from the remaining troops of the Viking and Crusaders, who both had deployed their 1st through 6th regiments at a full strength of 2,000 in each regiment. That had been before taking heavy losses of, at Stalker's estimation, 40 to 50% in the counterattack. They had now been reinforced by elements of 2 infantry divisions and 2 mechanized divisions, making up about 40,000 men in total, and the Philistines with 7 regiments, all of whom had yet to see action. There were also the remains of the 5th and 2nd Armor Divisions, both of which were now severely under strength. That gave a total estimated combat strength of around 85 to 90,000 troops, most lacking their heavy equipment, with the flanks needing to be held and heavily reinforced, and a front some 50 kilometers in length. They were spread very thin. Against this, the Red Legion could field some 3 full-strength corps, plus 1 that had been mauled in the action so far, plus an unknown number of enemy mecha and Goliaths. That meant that the Red forces could total as many as 450,000 troops, all well equipped with heavy armor and weaponry. As Stalker listened, the final plan was decided. The assault troops would move forward and take up positions amongst the wreckage to ambush and break up the Red formations. The infantry would provide the second line of defense, while the limited available armor would provide overwatch and plug any gaps as the lines bent, but hopefully didn't break. Medical stations have been set up in the bases, and all the losses from the earlier actions have been gathered there, and everyone knew if they fell to the Reds, it would be a massacre. Stalker and every other soldier manning the line was determined not let that happen. The meeting broke up, and everyone hurried to assist with the preparations. As Stalker moved off, a few more LTTs landed, and to his surprise, he saw Terra Nova, Praetorian, and Excalibur soldiers pour from them, many of them bearing bandages and battle scars. Stalker indeed jogged over to the new arrivals in curiosity. "Where the hell did you lot come from?" "We were at a rest and relaxation center. When we heard what was happening, you didn't think you were going to keep all the glory for yourselves, did you?" replied a bandaged Terra Nova soldier. You're welcome anytime you want to drop by, said D. But no one told us you were coming? We had to persuade, a few LTT's pilots to get here. Seems our names were left off the guest list. Must have been an oversight. I'll have words with the concierge when this is all over, said D in a serious voice. So where do you want us? Said one of the armored men, suddenly serious. We are to deploy into the debris field and ambush the enemy. You men can pick your own place. Satisfied, the assault troops grabbed their gear and moved off at a steady jog. Stalker and D went to a nearby Philistine's drop pod and retrieved some of the supplies and spare ammunition that they came equipped with. All along the line, others did the same. Stalker had grown used to the constant dull thud of artillery and didn't even notice it became more distant as he moved out into the wreckage-strewn plain, passing through the lines of regular infantry as he did so. The infantrymen looked at them with awe as all along the kilometers of front between the FOBs the assault troops passed through the hastily prepared positions. They moved about a kilometer forward of the infantry, 1,000-meter Stalker thought. That would give them a bit of room to move when the attack finally came. The biggest question was where the hammer would fall the hardest. What were the Reds planning?